What's up, guys? The draft has come and gone, and a lot of things have changed. You've probably seen everybody's draft grades, and you've probably seen some of mine on Twitter. But I thought I'd do something a little different in this video. Instead of focusing on the value of a draft and whether or not teams got good players, I want to focus on how much better teams got during the draft. And the answer is typically not a ton. Because even if a rookie's really good, he needs time to adjust. Even if you drafted a really good player, he might not even start. And frankly, one player rarely changes the fortune of a team that much unless he's a quarterback. So for instance, the Philadelphia Eagles have a great draft every year. But then there's players don't start for a while because the Philadelphia Eagles are loaded. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you could have a terrible draft in terms of value. Like last year, for instance, the Broncos taking Bo Nix. That was a reach. It was a bad pick, and he wasn't that great of a quarterback. But it's a lot better than Russell Wilson. So even though the value of that first round pick wasn't great, they got something very useful that made them better. I thought I would dive into all of these teams that I think did the most to help themselves right now and the least. Now, usually there are teams that actually get worse in the draft because they reach on a bust or they replace a good player with a bad one. I don't think we had any of those this year. I don't think anybody got worse. I just think that some teams failed to take advantage of their opportunity. So, before we get into it, give me a like, give me a follow, give me a comment. Let me know who you want to hear about. Let me know what you think of the teams I talk about. The more you guys interact, the more videos I make. And I'll make as many of them as you want. I just got to know that you like them and what you like about them so I can keep doing it. But without further ado, let's get to the teams that I thought really helped themselves. All right, we're going to go in reverse order. So a few honorable mentions that I thought were really helpful drafts, but maybe just not that top tier. I thought the Seattle Seahawks helped themselves a lot. Gray Zabel in the first round really solidifies one of their interior offensive line positions. And I'm not sure whether they're going to play him at guard or center just yet, but I think he'll be really, really solid at either of those two kinds of positions. You put that with their stud left tackle in Cross and their good right tackle in Lucas, who should be actually healthy this year. And suddenly you've got three pieces of a really good offensive line. And that means that, let's say Zabel plays center. If you have a stud center and stud tackles, you can hide those guards a little bit because you can always double team them. They're insulated. But if you've got three weak links across the middle, your offensive line might as well not exist. It's like having a fence without any chain link. And then Nicky Manwari, I think he'll be a good, solid player. I think that Mike Macdonald will be able to use him in really creative ways because that's the kind of defensive coordinator he is. He likes his chess piece weapon types. But then past that, Torrey Horton, a later pick, he solidifies their wide receiving core because he can play X or Z, which just allows you a little bit more flexibility with Bobo, JSN, and Cup, who are all really slot restricted. So Seattle got better. They helped a desperate need on the interior, but I would have rather they added one more offensive lineman who I was high on, or honestly just didn't waste a third-round pick on a backup developmental project like Milroe. I don't like that pick, especially at that value. Next up, Cleveland Browns. Cleveland had a weird draft because they took two quarterbacks, neither of which are franchise guys. But Dylan Gabriel is solid. He's extremely polished, a ton of experience, and he's just a perfect facilitator type for this wide zone offense. So, Dylan Gabriel ain't winning you many games, but he's also not going to cost you that many games. He's in that Case Keenum, Brock Purdy mold of facilitator. You give him a good offense with some easier reads and some easier throws, and he can keep you in a game. And as long as the rest of the team is pretty good and it's coached well, then you can win plenty of games. The issue is Mason Graham, really good player. He's a defensive tackle. It's not a huge needle-moving position. Carson Schweichinger, one of my very favorite players in this whole draft. It's a middle linebacker. Quinshon Judkins. I thought he was a reach, but now you have a starting legitimate bell cow running back. So while I don't think that Quinshon Judkins is super good, he's a huge help to their team because they didn't have anything there. And he certainly is a starting caliber running back. Harold Fannin Jr. is a fun little weapon. He helps a little bit. And I actually really like Dylan Sampson. I think he's going to be better than Judkins, but we're splitting hairs and it's not really worth arguing over. So Cleveland added a lot of starters that help a lot, just at positions that don't mean as much to me, right? Defensive tackle, inside linebacker, and running back, and bridge quarterback. Those are like the least valuable things you could add to a team. That said, I think they won the Travis Hunter trade. I think they got good value on these players. It's just they didn't get that much better as a team for this season. Finally, the Houston Texans. I don't really agree necessarily with their, shall we say, game plan. Jaden Higgins being your first pick when you have no offensive line is a choice, especially because he's going to be a slot receiver, and you've already got Christian Kirk, which means I think they're going to try to move Higgins outside and have Kirk play the slot. But then you draft Jalen Knoll, and Jalen Knoll's a good player, and you got good value. But he's a very slot-restricted player. So now you have like a glut at wide receiver of redundant players between Tank Dell, if he ever gets healthy, but more importantly, Christian Kirk, who's a slot really, Jalen Knoll, who's a slot really, Jaden Higgins, who's a slot really. And by the way, you didn't need any of this because Nico Collins is a freak stud, so you didn't need wide receiver help in the first place. What you really, really needed was offensive line help, and you got Ariante Ursary, one of the very best values in the entire draft. This was my second or third ranked offensive tackle, and you got him in the second round, mid-second round. Okay, that helps you a lot. But one offensive lineman does not an entire offensive line make. They probably should have added at least one more interior lineman just to really beef that protection up. I think that Houston's offensive line is fine now, but it could have been kind of good. So I think they helped themselves, and I think they actually drafted pretty well. It's just I don't think they got that much better this year. All right, now to the big five. Starting at 5, the New Orleans Saints. This is really simple. They got the best quarterback in the draft for my money. I love Tyler Shuck. I made a video on why he was my QB1 and why I think he'll be a franchise quarterback in the NFL and a legit one, not one of these fringe guys like a Kirk Cousins. Will he, won't they? No. This is a franchise quarterback in my mind. I think he starts this year because I don't think Derek Carr is going to play, at least not for the Saints. And then Kelvin Banks in the first round, a reach. I was much lower on Kelvin Banks than most. I had a late first round, early second round grade on him. But remember, this is not grading the draft. It's grading how much better they got. And the difference between Kelvin Banks, a pretty good starting tackle, and Trevor Penning, a really bad offensive tackle, just because he can't pass block at all, is a really big deal. Having a hole at right tackle versus a good right tackle. Are also losing Ryan Ramczyk. They needed this. Plus, having Banks as your new tackle allows you the opportunity to toy with moving Penning inside to guard, where I think he could still be a viable player, a starter even. And then finally, Vernon Broughton, I think he helps too, just because he's a beefy defensive tackle. You line him up next to Brian Breesy, and now you've got something of a defensive line, whereas before this, not as much. I still really wish they had any edge presence. Like, you can't just keep on sending Cam Jordan out there and thinking he'll be as athletic as he was 10 years ago. But alas, here we are. Curtis Granderson, same thing. So the Saints got better mostly because they added a quarterback, but also there were a couple of nice, helpful additions. At number 4, we got the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I wasn't super thrilled with Walter Nolan as their first-round pick. I thought that was a bit of a reach, a bit of a projection. But Will Johnson, a stud corner number 1 in round 2. Now, we have to assume he's healthy. If he's not, this draft falls all the way out of the honorable mentions because this is the linchpin. The way I see it, between Walter Nolan and Jordan Birch, they added starting caliber players along their defensive line. And with Will Johnson, they added a good starting caliber player at cornerback 1, which was a dire need for this team. I also thought that Denzel Burke was a risk worth taking as a developmental nickel corner. Just like he's a very athletic guy with a great pedigree who just couldn't put it together at Ohio State. And then Cody Simon's a really smart linebacker who, you don't necessarily want him starting long term, but he can plug a gap for you. A Nick Kwiatkowski, insert your unathletic, mediocre white linebacker here. He's enough. Uh, Number 3, Dallas. Dallas quietly had a fucking good draft. So Tyler Booker, he's a guard. You took him in the top. You took him 12th. What? What? Why? Guards don't matter. Well, guards do matter. And Tyler Booker is a stalwart. So you're probably going to have to kick Trey Smith out to tackle because last year you drafted Tyler Guyton and he's a bust. And we told you he was a bust, or at least I told you he was a bust when they made the pick. But why listen to me? I'm just pretty good at this shit. They're probably going to have to kick Tyler Smith out to tackle, which means they're going to have a gaping void at guard. You kick Tyler Booker into guard, and then maybe you try Tyler Guyton out at your other guard, and whereas you had an offensive line that has no left tackle and is missing a guard, by adding one guard, you've added effectively Tyler Guyton, who could be a mediocre guard on the right side. You've added Tyler Booker, who could be a great guard on the left side. You've moved your left guard to left tackle, where you can have a good left tackle, and suddenly one guy makes 3 positions better. I love the way that you can force multiply by adding that one good pick. As well, they added Donovan Azuriaku in the second round. Aside from being a great value, I think this is a really good starting edge rusher to go opposite Micah Parsons. And while I worry that they're both small, undersized, speed rush kind of guys, fine. That's why you've been drafting big interior defensive tackles, right? That's why you have Osa Odigizua to be a run-stopping penetrator. Like, I think that adding a good defensive or defensive end too is still really helpful because at the least, it's going to be tough to have a drop back passing game when you go to Dallas. Finally, Siobhan Ravel. Let's assume, or Savone, it's Savone Ravel. To the extent he's healthy, which is a big, projection. He's hurt his leg real bad, and apparently that made him fall in the draft. And assuming his film translates, and that's a big projection because I never got to see him play real competition, so my evaluation on him is very cursory. But he's a huge athletic corner. At the very least, he's a really good corner too, and he allows you to kick one of your starting 2 corners into nickel. So again, it's a force multiplier. He doesn't just make one position better, he might make 2 positions better, which I think is just really amazing value in the 3rd round. And again, that force multiplier is hard to beat. Finally, I think Jaden Blue is going to be a legitimate running back for them. I think he will legitimately be a starting caliber back, and they needed that so badly. And then Johnny Cornelius, quietly, I don't want to say this too loud, I think he can be a starting tackle, which means that in one draft, you rebuilt your entire offensive line by adding 2 dudes due to this force multiplier effect. So I think Dallas is in a good spot here. I think they revamped their offensive line, and I think they made their defense a lot more dangerous to pass against. That's the name of the game. That's why they're the 3rd best team in terms of getting better this year. Our runner-up, number 2, is going to be Carolina. I never thought I'd be praising the Carolina Panthers. They've been making a lot of mistakes for the last half decade. Eric Eager and I do not get along, but I call them like I see them. They added a star X receiver in the 1st round in Tet McMillan. So they go from having a, shall we say, not serviceable wide receiving core to suddenly a stud on the outside who, again, force multiplying, that kicks Xavier Legette. He's no longer your X. He can be your gadget slot where he belongs, which makes him better at what he does, and you're upgrading at X, force multiplier. Adam Thielen, he's versatile but not good at anything. He can move inside if need be. He can play more Z. He can be a 3rd or even 4th option depending on how much you like the kid out of Holy Cross. Adding 1X shifts everybody down and totally transforms that receiving group. I also really like Jimmy Horn. I think that if you have, maybe not right now because maybe they have to develop a little bit, but if your receiving core looks like out of 11 personnel, Tet McMillan at the X, Xavier Legette at the Z, and then you have Jimmy Horn in the slot. That is explosive. That is dangerous. And you've got Twin Towers with a speedy jitterbug in the middle. That could be really good. And then aside from addressing wide receiver, which is is a very valuable position that they addressed really well, and they addressed another really valuable position in defensive end. I really like Nick Scorton, especially now that he's down at the lower playing weight that he exhibited at Purdue. He's extremely quick. He's very powerful for his size at only 6'2" and like 260. And his spin move is nice. So I think he'll be a really solid, if not good, defensive end. And then Princely Umanmielen out of Ole Miss. He's an athlete. He's a bit of a project, but now they have something to put on the other side. So all of a sudden, Nick Scorton, Princely U as your rotational rusher, and Jadeveon Clowney, that goes from being a very, very boring, unexciting, frankly not dangerous edge group to a pretty good pass rush group. And then the best draft in terms of making your team better today. This does not mean they got great value. This does not mean that I think they're going to be a stud team. I just think the New York Giants got better more than any other team between Wednesday, the day before the draft, and Monday, the day after the draft. Look, Abdul Carter is really good. And him and Brian Burns, similar to the Dallas problem, it's a very slight, very pass rush heavy defensive front. But shit, you cannot do 7-step drops against that front because one of those two dudes is going to get home on your quarterback. They also added Darius Alexander in the second round. It's a good defensive tackle, and you pair him up with Dex Lawrence, and suddenly, holy shit, that front four is terrifying. And I'm a big believer, again, in force multiplication. So it's one thing to have a good defensive end group, but when you put a good defensive end group next to a really good defensive tackle group, yeah, your secondary still may have problems. It's not going to matter. The quarterback's going to be terrified. He's going to be on his ass. Offenses are going to change the way they throw against you because they know it's all got to be quick shit. They don't have time to set up and do anything fun, tricky, or designer. It's got to be screens, balls out. We're running for our lives because it's just, it's like if you have one strength that's really strong, like the Giants' defensive line now, it's like having a real pointy spear versus like having a really hard, heavy club. A heavy club is when you're well-rounded and every part of your defense is pretty good, has no holes. Heavy club do a lot of damage. A very sharp spear might not always do that much damage, but if you get him with the pointy end, it is bad. So I think I really like what the Giants did there. Additionally, Cam Scatabo, perfect complement for their run game, right? They had the receiver in Tyrone Tracy, scat back a little bit, receiving back, speed back. Now they got the hammer and Cam Scatabo for the inside runs. And then I really love the Marcus Mbao pick, guard out of Purdue. He is so quick. He has such great movement skills. All of a sudden, this Giants offensive line, which just 2 years ago was one of the worst I've ever seen in my life, is a really good offensive line. Illuminor and Thomas on the outside. Nice. You've got Evan Neal, Marcus Mbo, and Runyon competing for 2 jobs on the inside. You will find 2 good guards out of that group of 3. I don't know which order it comes out in. That's for training camp. And then finally, John Michael Schmitz on the inside at your center. Dude, that's a good line. You have a good offensive line now, and that's huge. And then finally, part of the reason you need a good offensive line, it's very clear to me by drafting Jackson Dart that Dable wants a downfield passing attack with some quarterback movement. And that makes sense because why would you bring Russell Wilson in unless that's exactly what your offense was being designed to do? All he can do anymore is kind of move around and throw deep. And not even well, just like averagely. If you're bringing Jackson Dart in to throw deep, he's a quarterback from a very simple offense. He's going to need time. He's going to feel antsy. Give him good protection. They did that. As for Jackson Dart himself, I think they reached. I don't think Jackson Dart's a franchise quarterback. I think he's a project with decent upside to be a low-end franchise quarterback, but I don't love him. I don't even like him. He was my quarterback 3. I had a 3rd or 4th round grade on him. This was a bad pick. But Like we said in the intro, you can get better while making a bad pick. Because remember, a pick is capital. So if I gave you $1,000 of capital and you come back and you give me $800 cash 2 weeks later, I would, my reaction would be, what the hell? What'd you lose $200 for? But you still gave me $800. So I made some money that I didn't have yesterday. Not in the long term, but in the short term. Are the Giants going to be contenders now? Not a chance. But they'll be a competent, real football team, and Brian Dable has a chance at saving his job now. Whereas before this draft, it wasn't looking so good. Right? Before this draft, they came in with a patchy defensive line, not a good secondary, a bad quarterback room, and, questions on the offensive line. Now, sick defensive line hides a lot of mess on the back end of the defense, right? Your offensive line is going to be really good one way or another, no matter who wins the starting positions, and that gives you a better environment for your okay enough quarterback to run the offense. So we'll actually get a fair chance to see what Dable can do with a little bit of competence on the field for him. Same with Carolina. Do I think that they're going to be making a run for the NFC South? No. But I think that they're going to be a lot more like what we saw, in those couple nice games at the end of the season than their average over the course of last season because they made nice additions. Now, usually there are teams that actually get worse in the draft because they draft busts. They give up on players who are decent to take chances on players who end up being bad. I don't know that that's going to be the case for any team this year. But there are still teams that didn't help themselves. I'm going to start with the honorable mention, the Minnesota Vikings. They just didn't have any picks. And the one pick they did have in the first round, they used on Donovan Jackson. Now, perfect illustration. They got decent value. Donovan Jackson was going to go in the second round, right? He's a really good guard who even played pretty darn well at left tackle. He was going to go in the late first, early second round. But the Vikings didn't really need a guard, at least not this year. Now, preparing for the future is smart, but right now, they got Ryan Kelly. They got guys. The inside of that line is good and solidified through free agency. This was not pressing. This does not make them better now. Still, it's a pretty good pick. And then Ty Felton. I don't like Ty Felton personally. They need a wide receiver 3. I don't think he's a great fit. I think there were better options on the board for them. So I just don't think the Vikings changed at all over the weekend. And you know what? That makes a lot of sense for a team that had very few picks. Into the 5 teams that I thought really didn't help themselves nearly as much as they could have, and some of them not at all. At number 5, we're going to go with the San Diego Los Angeles Chargers. Their first round pick's Omarion Hampton. Omarion Hampton's a good running back. He's one of my top 10 people on my big board. But here's the problem. You didn't need a running back that bad, considering you had no wide receivers. All you have is a slot in McConkey, who's good, but he's a slot, right? It's like saying we don't need to draft a left tackle. We have a right guard. You need both. So Omarion Hampton was fine draft value, but it's not good team building value because your team needs a lot more stuff before you're ready for a running back. In the second round, you get Trey Harris. And I don't like Trey Harris. I don't think he'll be very good. But at least he's an X, so he's a small upgrade from Quentin Johnston, right? Because he can play X and theoretically catch a couple balls. Jamari Caldwell. Maybe he's good, maybe he's bad. But what he is for sure is a nose guard. He's a plugging interior defensive lineman. It's not the most valuable position. It doesn't help your team that much. It's something you could easily get in free agency. I just don't see how that makes you better. And then the edge that they took a chance on was Kyle Kennard, who I don't really believe in, despite his gaudy production in college. He's just not the athlete that you need to be productive in the NFL. So they didn't address their glaring holes at cornerback. They reached on an under-athletic edge. They reached on a running back when they don't have wide receiver. And then they took 2 kind of project swings at wide receiver. Like Trey Harris doesn't run many routes. He's got some drops. He's not very fast. But he's a big body with great body control and he's really good at winning at the catch point on jump balls. So maybe he turns into something. And then Keandre Lambert Smith. He's a combine freak show. He doesn't really play like that, though. He's not that fast on film. Maybe he turns into a good developmental Z or even an X. But when you have such glaring needs at X and Z and you don't address them at all, I'm skeptical. And when you make picks that help you, like Omarion Hampton's better than Najee Harris. How much? Not that much. Jamari Caldwell might be a good nose tackle. He might be a really good nose tackle. Does that matter? How much does that matter? Not that much. And then, yeah, I don't believe Kyle Kennard's good, so I don't think he's really a upgrade over Tuli, 45 edge. I really like him, and I really like Khalil Mack, and I don't think that Kyle Kennard is going to be better than or even worth playing over in a rotational role, either of them. So the Chargers kind of squandered a chance there. The Packers are a weird thing because they're number 4 on a team that really didn't help themselves. It's not that they got bad players. Like, I like Matthew Golden. I had a late first round grade on him. They got him in the late first round. What's wrong with that? Well, we had Matthew Golden at home. His name was Jaden Reed, and also kind of Dontavian Wicks. And like, how many wide receiver twos can one roster really have? The Packers are seemingly overloaded at the position. Anthony Belton, you reached on a tackle who I think can help you, and he's a big man and a big athlete, and maybe he can develop into a good tackle, but there were much better players on the board. You needed interior help too. One maybe minor upgrade at offensive line does not a good draft make. Savion Williams. How many gadget receivers can you have? How many guys are you trying to get the ball in space? You don't need wide receivers. Stop. You don't have to be the Lions of the Matt Millen era. There are other positions that you need. Speaking of which, Baron Sorrell. How many times does this team have to draft a defensive lineman of the exact same build between Lucas Van Ness and Rashawn Gary and Baron Sorrell? Like, you're just loading up this same thing, and Devontae Wyatt or Devondre Wyatt. Like, diversify. Get yourself a corner. If you're gonna get a receiver, get something you don't already have, like a big body. Get a running back. A change of pace guy, like a speedier pass catching or running back, so that Josh Jacobs doesn't have to do things that aren't in his wheelhouse so often. Just a lot of squandered opportunities, and everything's kind of redundant. They were already kind of loaded at the positions they drafted. And, maybe that makes for sustainable depth. Maybe that's great planning for 2-3 years down the line, which is why this is not a bad draft. They didn't get bad value. They just didn't get better for this year. Third up, I'm going to go with the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Tyler Warren fell to them at 14, and they don't really have a tight end. So they drafted him, but here's the problem. You have to look at tight end not in a vacuum, right? It's not like, do we have a cornerback? You have to look at tight end as a piece of the whole passing offense. You already have too many mouths to feed with a crappy quarterback, and I understand. There wasn't a quarterback worth taking in this draft at 14, at least in the Colts' estimation, that can replace Anthony Richardson. At least not yet, right? Maybe they didn't feel comfortable with Tyler Shuck's medicals or age. I think they're wrong, but okay. Maybe they just really didn't see it with Jackson Dart. I think that would have been correct of them. Regardless, Michael Pittman, A.D. Mitchell, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs. By the way, Jonathan Taylor's pretty damn good, and he's got to get the ball. That's 5 options that you really can't take off the field. And you're going to have to take one of them off the field for Tyler Warren now, who's a good, not special tight end. It doesn't really help your team. It helps your tight end group, but it doesn't actually help your passing receiving options. Then you take JT Tuimoloau. Yeah, you need edges. This is not a good one. You reached terribly and drafted a very mediocre athlete. It doesn't help. Right? Like, I think Tuimoloau might actually be better kicking inside to defensive tackle. and they already have too many of those guys. So I really don't like that. They needed a speed rusher with some length. They needed a Braden Swinson. We'll get to that later. I'm not familiar with Justin Wally's game. He's a cornerback. They really need cornerbacks. We'll see. And then Jalen Travis. I like Jalen Travis, the guard out of Iowa State. I think he can really become something. He's a little bit of a project. They needed offensive linemen badly. Overall, though, a lot of reaches, really bad value, and drafting luxury picks instead of helping things that really needed to be helped. That being said, two of their four notable picks were like good players, just not good team building. So I didn't want to knock them too hard. The second least helpful draft in terms of this year, I would say, is the Atlanta Falcons, which is weird and honestly really concerning because they spent through the nose to get marquee players, which should theoretically help now. And they did it at positions of need. So the Falcons took Jalen Walker in the first round. And fact of the matter is, I just disagree on the evaluation. If the Falcons are right and Jalen Walker's a really, really, really good edge, yeah, awesome draft. You got way better. This is huge. But I don't think he is at all. I don't think he even really belongs at edge in the NFL. And to the extent that he plays it, I think he'll be mediocre at the very best. He's undersized, he's not that athletic, and he was never productive as an edge in college. Why is he supposed to be some like franchise-changing guy now? Later in the first round, they traded back up again to get James Pierce. Now, James Pierce is a really good football player, but apparently his off-field concerns are terrible. Apparently he is just a mess. Hates football, doesn't show up to things, mercurial, moody, everything you don't want in a first-round pick. So if you poured all these resources into edge, which you needed help at, you really needed edges, and you walk away with a very inconsistent malcontent in James Pierce and a very undersized, not very productive, frankly, bust in Jalen Walker, the value's terrible, and you didn't actually get that much better because Lorenzo Carter was fine as an edge, and Caden Ellis was enough as an edge. So you went from like a C edge group to a C edge group, but you spent a lot to do it. Xavier Watts, I think, is a good safety, but they already have a really good free safety in Bates, and I don't think that I don't know that they'll be able to play together really well. Billy Bowman's a fine linebacker. We'll see. And Jack Nelson's nothing to write home about. So I think Atlanta spent big. I think they identified their needs really well. I just don't think they evaluated well enough to actually get better. And finally, the number one team that did not help themselves at all. What are the Miami Dolphins thinking? They come into this draft with no offensive line. It is a disaster. It is a graveyard. They've had dudes retire. They've had guys just fall off cliffs. It's bad. They need help bad. Their wide receivers are great. Their running backs are great. They think they have their quarterback figured out. They don't. Tua is terrible, but at least Zach Wilson's there and he's physically gifted. So what do they do in the first round? They add to their greatest strength. And whereas, I talked a lot about force multipliers in the earlier in the good stock up section of this video. Look, Chop Robinson's awesome. Jalen Phillips is awesome. You even have Brad Chubb, who really belongs at defensive tackle, especially now, but he's fine. And then you got Sealer, who's a really good defensive tackle. You don't need help. So to add Kenneth Grant, a nose guard, who I do love, but he's kind of redundant to that already great lineup in your first round, instead of getting an offensive tackle, who you really, really need, that's a big misstep to me. You didn't get that much better, and the opportunity cost is terrible, right? Like if Kenneth Grant comes in and he's everything I believe he is, which is my defensive tackle 1 or 2 in this draft, it doesn't change anything. You already had a really, really good defensive line with good defensive tackles and good defensive tackle options of rotation like Brad Chubb. So, Second round, you do address the offensive line, and you get Jonah Savaiinea, who's a converted tackle out of Arizona, and a reach because he's mediocre. He's very mediocre, and he's a guard, and there were good tackles available. Ariante Ursary. And frankly, they needed multiple players. They needed a tackle and a guard, and maybe another guard, and maybe another tackle. And they addressed none of this. They got one guard, and he's mediocre at best. Not a huge improvement. And then they went back to the well with Jordan Phillips and Jason Marshall. Like more trenches, more things that don't really help. So to fail to address the offensive line until the second round, at which point you draft a mediocre guard, and then to double up on defensive tackle when that's already a strength, and then to add a running back when that's already a strength, terrible. You didn't get better. Even if all these players work out the way you think they will, Miami, and all of them are really good starters, you didn't get better. You already had these things. And maybe that's great for building for the future, but if you're building for the future, get rid of your quarterback with brain trauma and trade Tyreek Hill, right? Like, figure out which track you're on and stick to it rather than half your team aging rapidly and half of it building for the future. I forget which Greer brother runs the Dolphins and which one runs the San Jose Sharks. I believe it's Chris with the Dolphins, and to the extent that that's right, bad job. You did not get any better whatsoever this draft, in my opinion. Finally, I want to talk about 3 drafts that were really, really good, but I don't actually think they made their teams that much better. The third one is the Baltimore Ravens. They kind of did their tried and true, like, classic thing where they load up on wide receivers who can separate late in the draft, and they draft some maybe people who slip early, whether it's because of perceived combine testing issues or, in Mike Green's case, crimes, really bad ones. And I don't want to talk about a lot because if they're true, they're heinous. Malachi Stark's first round pick, dude's a baller. Now, he doesn't make them a ton better because they already had safeties I really liked. Like Kyle Hamilton. We'll get to Kyle Williams in a moment. Kyle Hamilton is a really good versatile chess piece safety. Malachi Starks is also a really good versatile chess piece safety. Similar, kind of redundant, but you need multiple safeties. But call me crazy, I still had a little hope for Marcus Williams. Call me crazy, I think that soon it's going to be time to move one of your aging outside corners back to safety. I don't know. I just don't think that Malachi Starks as a second or third safety moves the needle that much. Helps, really good player, doesn't move the needle, especially for a team that's already as loaded as the Ravens. Emory Jones, developmental guard. I think it's a worthwhile gamble. He's developmental. He's not going to see the field. Teddy Buchanan, Cal, athletic, smart, good linebacker prospect. Going to need a little time to develop. He's stuck behind Roquan Smith. You ain't going to see him. LeJontay Wester, I really like him. The Ravens are so stacked at wide receiver. You're not going to see him. And then Enos Peebles, I really like him. The Ravens are stacked at defensive tackle. You're not going to see him. So they got at least 3 studs in this draft, in my opinion. But you're never going to see them. They're not going to move the needle. In 2-3 years, we might be looking back like, God damn, how'd they get Mike Green in the second? How'd they get Enos Peebles in the 4th or 5th or whatever? That's crazy good value. But right now, how much they got better this year, I think the only one that actually contributes is Mike Green. And that's assuming he stops doing heinous crimes for like a minute, please. Next up, the second best draft that didn't really move the needle. The Kansas City Chiefs did it a goddamn again. The Kansas City Chiefs are similar to the Ravens in that they're so damn good that, like, it's really hard to move the needle. But they got the best tackle in the draft, for my money, in Josh Simmons at the end of the first round. How? The best offensive tackle. Now, they already had some pretty good tackles. I think this makes them better, certainly, right? Because, like, now they get to move Kingsley BYU offensive tackle from last year's second round. They get to move him to guard, and I think that really solidifies their entire offensive line. It's a little bit of a force multiplier, but I already kind of had faith that they would be good on the offensive line because it's an Andy Reid team with heavy investment in the offensive line. It's just going to be good. They got Omar Norman Lott in the second round. A little bit of a reach, but a high upside project defensive tackle who pass rushes really well. And that'll open up Chris Jones. But, like, They already had a bunch of power rushers. In a couple years, maybe this means you can move on from, some of your guys, but in the meantime, right now, I don't think you got that much better. Jalen Royals. Now this can go one of two ways. Jalen Royals can really help if Rashee Rice doesn't play. If Rashee Rice plays due to health and suspensions and whatever, if Rashee Rice plays, Jalen Royals doesn't see the field at all, doesn't help at all. If Rashee Rice is out, Jalen Royals steps in his role really, really well. And actually, I guess makes them better because we have to pretend like Rashee Rice doesn't exist for a while. Jeff Bossa is a rangy linebacker who I think is great depth, and he'll be the heir apparent to, the Willie Gay role eventually, but not right now. And Brashard Smith, I think he actually could overtake the starting running back position. I think he could replace Pacheco. I think he's an amazing receiver, and he's just going to go ham in this offense. But I doubt he gets the starting job right away as a late round running back. I bet you he has to work his way into that role. So maybe by the end of next year, he's helping a lot. But A, still a running back, and B, probably not going to get a ton of touches yet. And then finally, I think this is the best draft in terms of adding good players, of finding value in the draft. But it's not that great of a draft in terms of actually improving your team right now. The New England Patriots might have had the draft of the decade if it just comes down to finding good players. But when it comes to moving the needle now, So starting off with Will Campbell, let's assume he plays left tackle. I think he will. I think he'll be good. I think he would be better at guard, but he'll be good. They also added Jared Wilson, who I think is a really good center, like a really good one, but I doubt he starts early just because they just paid Garrett Bradbury. They've got multiple second-year players who they drafted in the second and third rounds last year, who they're going to be trying to find places for on the offensive line, like Layden Robinson. And they got to figure out what they're going to do with Cole Strange. There's a lot of competition for low-end starting jobs in the interior. I think Jared Wilson as a rookie would have been a good starter, so slightly better than those guys. But A, I don't think he actually will start. And B, even if he did, it's not a huge upgrade to go from a C plus or B minus guard or center to a B, right? Doesn't move the needle. Braden Swinson, the steal of the draft, arguably. I love him. I had him as a first-round pick. They got him in the 5th. I doubt he plays because they love Keon White and they just paid Harold Landry big money. So he's your third edge. So he's not going to help. And the only reason he really would get on the field is as a rotational piece, which doesn't help that much. Or if Harold Landry's game blows to hell, in which case they weren't as good as we thought they were anyway. So I don't think he helps that much. And then finally, Kyle Williams and TreVeyon Henderson. Something that's kind of frustrated me about the reaction to the Patriots draft is like, I agree, they did a great job, but the priorities were a little out of whack. And your wide receiving core still kind of stinks. Like, Kyle Williams is a third-round pick. He's an undersized outside receiver who wins with speed. His hands are not very good. Well, they're good. They're fine. But they're not good. He's not a ball winner. He's not going to steal any contested catches. His routes are very limited. He doesn't run that many of them yet. So Kyle Williams helps, but let's say he starts. Let's say he's everything Patriots fans hope he is. He's probably going to be a Z, maybe an X. I've actually heard some rumors he'll be an X. We'll see. I think if Kyle Williams comes in and starts as a rookie, he'll be a Z. You put Mac Hollins as your X, and you kick Stephon Diggs into the slot with some decent versatility between those three. That's a mediocre wide receiving core, and maybe Kyle Williams develops into something special, but it's not going to be as a rookie. And, we're assuming that Diggs is a good receiver again, which he's getting older and he's coming off a pretty bad injury. So we hope, but we don't know. And then Mac Hollins, he stinks. And before the draft, before you got Kyle Williams, your wide receiving core looked like Mac Hollins still at the X, no change. Pop Douglas in the slot, who Patriots fans are very fond of, and I'm fairly fond of. I think he's an NFL starter in the slot. And then Stephon Diggs at the Z. You're not really getting better by adding Kyle Williams. You're just getting a little different. And I think it ends up being better in the long run right? I think that if you can add a big body receiver with Kyle Williams, now you're cooking with some gas, especially if Stephon Diggs can hang on for a few years and play that Chris Godwin role in the slot. It could be really nice. But right now, this year, I don't think that Kyle Williams changes that much for the Patriots passing offense. Same with Travion Henderson. I love Travion Henderson. He was my third ranked back. I really wanted to make him my second ranked back, but he's just not powerful enough to be an every down between the tackles runner. Great pass blocker. Explosive. He's like if Miles Sanders could block like really well even. But he's a third down back. It's not a very valuable position because Ramondre Stevenson's still going to get most of the carries, right? So you're adding complementary pieces. You're upgrading your offensive line a little bit. You got a great defensive end, but you're probably not going to play him anytime soon. So the Patriots had a really good draft, acquiring a lot of good players. They just didn't get that much better now. And that probably isn't. It's probably not their goal. Their goal is probably to build something more sustainable for the future. And maybe they go out and they trade for A.J. Brown or Tyreek Hill, and boom, suddenly they are cooking with gas. Suddenly their receiving corps is good. But right now, just looking at the draft, not really there. So I want to hear from you. Throw in the comments. Who do you think had a good draft? Who do you think got better? Do you think anybody got worse? Who do you think got busts? Who do you think addressed needs? What are you guys thinking? Is there any team you want to hear my thoughts on? The more you guys comment, the more you guys like, the more you guys subscribe, the more videos I make. And I'll make as many as you want as long as people are consuming them. So now that the draft is done, I'm going to grade a few players that I never got around to during draft season. But for the most part, it's looking like I'm out of film to grind. So we may figure out something to talk about this summer, but we may have a little break from football, unfortunately. We'll see. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you would like me to cover over the summer, any kind of like projects, quarterback reviews, what have you, that you think that this channel would really benefit from. But until then, hasta.